Good morning. This is Regine with the Transmission of Awakening channel. Today my guest is Amoda Jeevan, and I'm delighted to have her here. We've been corresponding for a few months now, so it's finally nice to have her on the show. So welcome to the show, Amoda Jeevan. How are you today?
Good morning, Regine. It's good afternoon here where I am in the UK.
That's great. So you said you're in South London? South,
I'm in
excuse me, South
South
UK,
England, yeah,
South
on
England.
the south
Okay,
coast.
okay, that's where you're based. Is that where you're
Yeah,
based? Okay,
yeah.
all right. So I just read a little bit about you on your website, and I saw your interview with Dick Archer on the Buddha at the gas pump, and also with Renata, and I was really, um, what's the best word? I was just drawn. I was really drawn to your presence. And I felt that you had something special to offer, and I wanted to talk to you about your life and your journey. So, can you please start by telling us how this all came about for you, this path that you're on?
Wow, that's a big question, huh? Um, it depends where we want to start. I was quite an inward child, um, and when I was very young, I would inhabit a really quiet space inside. Um, I guess looking back on it now, it was a kind of, I don't know whether you'd call it a mystical state, but it was certainly a sense of like being at home in something really deeply silent. And then, of course, it got lost as I grew up, as it does in most of us as we get conditioned and go through schooling and parental stuff. Um, and kind of returned in my early teens, where I was very interested in um, what were quite deep questions for a 14-year-old, like, who am I? Who am I really? Um, not necessarily in relationship to the world, but who am I on a deep core level? What's the purpose of my life? Again, on a deep, um, essential level, and what's the meaning of life? And so I kind of explored through reading things like Carl Jung and that kind of thing. Um, and then again, it got lost as I went through quite a few challenges in my life at home and through my university days, which lasted many years, where I got somewhat lost in academia and a kind of blinkered science. Which I was studying psychology at the time, but I studied psychology because I really wanted to know what the soul was. That's what psychology meant to me. But I ended up in mainstream academic world where the psychology was very scientific and very much about experimentation and statistics and things like that. So I kind of got lost in that, and all of that got pushed to the back of my consciousness. And I guess the beginning of a conscious, let's say, spiritual search started when I was about 28, 29, and my academic career, um, I guess you'd say it exploded in the sense that I had an emotional, what seemed like an emotional breakdown at the time and a kind of spiritual breakthrough. I realized that um, who I thought I was as a form was not who I really was, and there was something much vaster. And the whole meaning of me studying and achieving a scientific career just kind of meant it. The whole meaning of it just got pulled out from under my feet, and I started to go really deeply inside and on a path of inquiry and exploration, which meant unraveling a lot of my conditioning. But it meant that my sort of very linear path in life of academic success, I guess, came to a very abrupt end, as did many other things in my life. My relationship collapsed. I lost my home, which I owned. I um, lost all capacity to finance myself. I lost most of my possessions. Um, and I became penniless and without anything very material, and had everything stripped away in terms of my identity in the world. And on the one hand, this was a big shock and a kind of calamity, being left like this in the middle of a big city, London, which where I lived at the time. So I wasn't in a mountaintop in the Himalayas. This was right in the middle of the city. Um, but it left me wide open to discover something much more true. And that journey took many years of peeling off the layers and asking different questions. And yeah.
So, did you find that you felt like you were different from other people? You talked about your journey starting when you were, a child and 14 years old. Did you always feel like there was something different about you?
I always did feel different, yes. Partly because I was an only child. I had no brothers and sisters, and I had no friends either. I had quite a strange upbringing where a lot of those social situations were denied me for various reasons. And so I was quite isolated. So, in that sense, I felt very different. I had a very mixed and confused and what seemed at the time mysterious story of who my parents were. So again, I felt very much an outsider and not knowing who I was, and also because my interests were different to other children of my age. So yes, I felt like the ugly duckling.
Yeah, well, I can relate to that too, actually. Um, and then, so your university years, did it get better? Did you have more of a social life?
No, it got worse. It truly got worse because by then I was very isolated in myself. I carried a lot of trauma from my childhood, and I really pushed it down, so I wasn't aware of it consciously or working with it consciously. So I spent a lot of my time at university being very depressed. Even though I was depressed, I still continued very persistently on the academic level, so it didn't impair that. But socially, I was completely inept. And in fact, I didn't socialize at all. I was completely the outsider in my peer group. And it being the University of London, there's no campus, so you're kind of left on your own anyway. So that exacerbated it, and I actually got into a very dark space in my university years, and there were several suicide attempts, um, and yeah, it was a dark time for me.
So how were you able to get out of that? What was the defining
Well,
effect?
this kind of it just sort of built up the sort of few months of build up where it was almost like something was rumbling in me, this deeper calling. It was perhaps the kind of questions that I'd had as a young teenager. Who am I? What's the meaning of life? uh, is there a soul? Is there a meaning to existence? Is there a God? Those questions, which I'd completely pushed away for a number of years, or many years, they sort of started to come up. Why they came up, I don't know. They just did. Obviously, because they'd been repressed for so long and it was the right time. They just all came up very quickly and sort of burst through. And this sort of emotional breakdown, which meant that everything that I had on the material level got stripped away, um, it left me very open. And uh, the the first thing it did, I guess, was it sort of, as I was walking around the streets of London, I'd see things I didn't see before, and I'm not talking about entities or aliens. Just like a poster in the London Underground, which said something about TM, transcendental meditation. Things that I'd been, I got the tube every day to go to university, and I hadn't seen it before, and it just sort of stood out at me, and it really spoke to me. Or certain discussion groups on philosophy, and suddenly I was drawn down these paths. The first one being meditation, and I found that after some time I fell into meditation very easily, because it was like when I was really young, when I was a child, that I was very at home in the silence. And so the path of meditation, starting off with TM, but very quickly moving on to Buddhist meditation and then Zen meditation, was something that I used, if you like, as an anchor point in my life. So that's the beginning. And in that, I saw that I'm not my thoughts, and there is a vast open space that is conscious of the space itself. And that gave me a lot of relief and, well, I guess relief from some of the darkness that had been around. I saw that there was a deeper, perhaps broader, vaster significance or essence of life. And then at the same time as that, I sort of fell into a lot of self-exploration. Just my attention drew that way to exploring a lot of different forms of transpersonal psychotherapies and breathing techniques and many different modalities, some shamanic modalities. And I found that I had very mystical experiences and visions that were corroborated by reading about them afterwards in books. And so this just set me on that path, which gave my life some meaning. It also unraveled some of my story to do with my parental upbringing and my conditioning and my cultural roots and the traumas that I was carrying. So that took a number of years.
So these realizations and these modalities, did you use those in your academic work?
Say that again, Ricky.
Did you use the realization that you had about that you're not your thoughts and all the other paths that you discovered, the Buddhism, shamanism, and things like that? Did you use those findings in your academic work as well?
Okay, what happened is that when that path of self exploration and life exploration started, the academic just stopped. It just totally stopped. It stopped because I could see no meaning in it anymore. And what I discovered was that for myself was that the primary reason or the primary motivation for me following an academic path was to feel like I was somebody. So I could identify with that, because otherwise I didn't really know who I was. And very quickly, as I went in a different direction, I knew instinctively or intuitively that any sense of identity, when it's that strong, is not the truth. So my attachment to getting an academic qualification was not the truth of who I am. It was a surface layer of my personality. So to be true to that, I had to walk away from it, which was quite challenging and a bit like, just jumping into the unknown abyss. But that's what was true for me.
Well, that's pretty impressive, because we live in a world where it seems to be all about credentials. And I know a lot of students who they might have a yearning to be an artist or whatever, or be on the spiritual path, but they feel like they have to go to school and they have to get the credentials to be able to make it in life. So,
Mm.
I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, how did you deal with that? How were you able to go beyond the need to come to society standards?
I had no, in truth, I had no affiliation with society's standards. I never have done. Apart from the one thread, I mean, there's two threads, I guess, that put me on an academic path, or three. One was my sincere desire to study psychology as an investigation of the soul and core essence. That was my initial desire. That's not what happened, because that's not what's being offered, or at least then, in my days, that's not what was being offered on the academic, table, if you like. The second motivation was that I felt that by studying something that I could also research, which I did as a doctorate, I could offer something to the world that was of value. So I'd have some purpose where it was both interesting to myself, but also was providing cutting edge research that was valuable to the world. And the third motivation was because I wanted to please my father by being somebody, because I didn't have a strong sense of who I am. So it's a kind of uh, wanting to be loved by the father, whether the father is the parental father, or the cosmic father, or the world itself. The first two motivations are valid for anybody. The third motivation wasn't, and as soon as I saw that, that contaminated the other motivations, and it had the whole thing had to go.
So, what would be your advice to someone who wants to be on a spiritual path or who wants to follow their heart in whatever way? What would you tell them?
I don't. From where I am now, it doesn't matter what you do. You follow your heart. That I followed what appeared to be my heart for 12 years, and then it wasn't anymore. So it doesn't matter. What you do doesn't matter. What matters is the discovery of who you really are.
Yeah, but we need money to survive, for better or worse. How do you follow your heart, but also live in the world in a practical way when we need
I'm not
money?
concerned. I'm not concerned with that. I never have been. I'm still here. I'm still here. I've never been concerned with money and earning money. Of course, we need a shelter. Of course, we need to stay warm. Of course, we need to eat. And it depends what your values are. If your values are to have security and safety, then of course that can be followed. And they don't have to be contradictory, which is what I'm finding these days. For a while, uh, the two didn't go together for me. And now, so it depends what your values are, but I'm talking about freedom, real freedom, the freedom that isn't to do with the world, the freedom that is to do with something much more permanent than that, because the world will come and go. The conditions of your life will come and go, but something more permanent. So really, it depends what you're looking for. It depends, and there comes a point in someone's life, maybe not in this lifetime, but at some point, and very frequently in this lifetime, because more and more people are getting to this point, where all the wealth in the world and all the credentials in the world and all the safety in the world and all the security in the world and anything else that you can name is still not enough. There is a deeper question, and the question is, who am I? Not who am I in relationship to the world, but who am I irrespective of the world?
Hmm.
Yeah. Once that's a kind of vertical question, it takes you on a vertical journey. When that is inquired into, it doesn't stop or prevent necessarily the need to be taken care of physically in terms of having somewhere to live and all of this, but that doesn't become the priority or the driving motivation above and beyond all else. And in fact, everything gets given unto you in some form or another to support that journey. So yes, we do need to be in the world, and there is a physical form that needs to be taken care of. But in my case, and perhaps in some other people's cases, I don't know, sometimes, not always, when we ask the question, who am I? Some of the external props get stripped away. It doesn't have to be as dramatic as it was for me. I live quite a dramatic life, or I have done, not anymore so much, but I have done. So things happened very suddenly for me and very dramatically. It doesn't have to be that way. I see people who ask the question, who am I, and go on that deep inquiry, and their external life doesn't change that much. But if there is something in the external that is a prop for identity, where the identity is wrapped up with your sense of security, or your identity is wrapped up with your qualifications, or your identity is wrapped up with how much love you get from a relationship and all this stuff, that will get stripped away, because truth will burn away everything that's false. Otherwise, it's not truth.
So, are you saying that if the desire for truth and freedom is stronger than the desire for security or fitting into society, then those concepts will be stripped away?
They will certainly be brought into the light of consciousness, which is a kind of fire, a purification space, in order to be examined as to whether they are true or not. Whether there is a sense, this is how I kind of like to explain it. It's like a load of scaffolding that we erect over our lifetime through our conditioning that props up this sense of me, the sense of who I am. And anything that doesn't match that part of the scaffolding, we reject, or we deny, or we turn away from, or we just don't want to look at, or, or we kind of solidify around to make it more solid. And when we go on a quest for truth and the question, who am I? That contraction around that part of the scaffolding, whether it's denial or attachment, will start to reveal itself more strongly. And we can re-identify with that if there's fear, a huge amount of fear, and we don't really want to sincerely inquire into it as to whether this is who I am or not. But if we are sincere, then inevitably it will have to be purified. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to lose our home or anything like this, but it does mean that our sense of identity has. Now, for me, at that time in my life, my sense of identity was so wrapped up in my academic vocation that it had to be stripped away. For somebody else, it might not. And maybe at this point in my life, which is, 30 years later, maybe that would not have to be stripped away in the same way. And we just don't know. But the willingness to have everything that is false die into the light of truth is the sincere path of inquiry. If we're not willing for it to die, to be stripped away, to be burnt away, to be surrendered into the fire of truth, of love, essentially, then we might as well give up the spiritual quest, because it's not really a spiritual quest. It's just a quest to feel better about ourselves.
Well, did you feel a lot of, when you had everything stripped away, did you experience a lot of fear? I can imagine being homeless and penniless. I mean, what was that like?
Well, yes, there was a lot of fear, of course. But there was also a surrender to it.
Mm,
That's what was happening. That's what was happening. So, and who I am isn't the circumstances of my life.
mm. So when you found out, when you surrendered to it, did conditions improve?
Not initially, no. I mean, this is a long time ago. That's in my 20s. I'm in my 50s now. So a lot of things have changed.
Mm,
The inquiry got refined. That was the beginning for me. That was the beginning of everything tumbling and unraveling and uh, discovering and exploring. And I was willing to give everything to that. It did very quickly lead me to India, um, and a more um, traditional spiritual search, if you like. So I kind of was willing to give everything up and go on that particular journey, and that took about, I guess, about 7 years, um, because that's what I was doing at the time. It changed after that. It changed because not only did I mature, not only did I find that it can also be um, an endless search in that way. And I realized that what I was looking for was happiness. You know, some idea of happiness, this eternal state of happiness. And so I was trying this method and going to this guru and trying this and this and this and this in the quest for some kind of perfect state of happiness. And that came to an end in my 40s when a much, much deeper um, falling into the question, who am I, happened. Yeah, and that's when something changed. Yeah,
mm,
it's almost like there were two phases. That was the initial phase where everything opened and everything was chaotic, and I was just exploring and unraveling, but all with this deep quest for truth. But then the second phase was when I stopped searching. I stopped looking for perfect happiness. I stopped chasing different teachers or ideologies or philosophies. And I allowed myself to really be with the unknown, to really fall into um, an abyss, where there was no idea what was in this abyss, no idea what this abyss would reveal, if anything. It was a kind of ego death. Like, it wasn't a kind of ego death, it was an ego death. It was like the any sense of identity of who am I in any way, even in a spiritual way, was completely surrendered into this abyss of unknownness. And in that, the self, the sense of self died. And unexpectedly, what was revealed was that I am everything and nothing.
mm,
So I died into nothing, and in dying into nothingness, not only did I become nothing, if you can become nothing, that's not quite the right terminology, um, because becoming implies something, but there was a dying into nothingness, into emptiness. And in that, the unexpected revelation was that I am everything. In other words, there is only oneness. There is only the one being, or beingness itself, expressing itself through everything, including what I experience as me. And that was the cutting of the cord, if you like, of any sense of being separate from anything, anything, existence itself, from life itself. I am life, and there is only one life. And that was really the turning point for me. And that was very unexpected because I'd stopped seeking then. I wasn't looking for happiness. I wasn't looking for enlightenment. Not that I had been looking for enlightenment necessarily. I had been looking for the truth. But I'd even stopped looking for that. So this was very unexpected to me. But in that, and it took a while to really kind of embody itself and mature, there was a freedom and a peace that had never been present before. And from that point on, everything that appeared as my life, if you like, was in present moment awareness, which meant that a lot of the, or some of the threads still of childhood trauma, or the kind of contractions around that, or senses of victimization through my history, they all dissolved as they came into awareness. So I didn't have to fix them anymore, or there's still a little bit of inner work going on. And that was like it was happening by itself. And then it's like through that process that just happened over a number of years, I could really be in the world. There was no more having to be away from the world like there was the first time. It's like I could really be in the world because there was no separation.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Oh, by the way, you look great. I would have never guessed that you were this young. um, so yes, I um, I actually lived in the spiritual community, the PM community in Fairfield, Iowa. That's how I know of Rick Archer. And there are some people there who have the belief that they have to really separate themselves from the world in order to, find the truth. But a lot of their quest centers on the chase for enlightenment. So it's interesting that you're saying that you actually could be a part of the world when you accepted the truth, and you're also distinguishing between the quest for truth and the search for enlightenment. Is that right?
Yes,
That's
I
how
think
I'm
that's,
understanding it. So yeah, let's talk about that because
yeah.
I like I said in that community, enlightenment is the buzzword, and there seems to be, and I'm not saying it's just that community, but there are some people on the spiritual path who feel like that that's the end goal. Like once they become enlightened, then everything will be fine, you know, and that they have to separate themselves from the world. So yeah, so I'd like to hear more about how you came to this.
Sure. That's a really good point. It's like the search for truth and the search for enlightenment, are they the same thing? Well, they can be, and they might be terms, different terms for the same thing. The only problem, if there is a problem with the search for enlightenment, is that, and I found this not only in my own discoveries, but also now that I'm sharing my work, if you like, or the fragrance of what's been awakened with other people. Um, I obviously get to dialogue with a lot of people on the path, and what I see is that this idea of searching for enlightenment, or this wanting enlightenment, or this desire for enlightenment, inevitably has a picture attached to it. It has a mental uh, picture, an idea of what enlightenment is. It's inevitable because as soon as we have a word or a concept, it will have an image somewhere in our psyche. And that will have been influenced by what we've read and what we've learnt and what we've been passed down culturally and all of this stuff historically. And even though we think that that's not happening, what's happening. And so it itself prevents us from really falling into the unknown, because um, if we're going to use that term enlightenment, or we could use awakening, it itself is a falling into the unknown. It's when we surrender into something that has no picture, that has no mind concept, that has no ideology attached to it. So it kind of is good to look at and be truthful about, what do we think enlightenment is? And almost 100%, even, I did this. That's why I didn't really look for it, because I thought it was like way out of my reach, was that enlightenment was some state that was kind of beyond the human, the normal human range, that meant I was perfect, or it meant a perfect life. Nothing bad happens. There's just this endless peace or this bliss and all of this stuff. Or maybe some kind of higher power that guides me, and all of this thing. And that's very attractive, because it means that we don't have to experience any pain anymore. And when we truthfully look at that, the possibility to then turn our attention to what is true, because that's not true. And if we think it's true, that this is what enlightenment will give us, then that picture of truth it will prevent us from really discovering what truth is. The discovery of truth is a willingness to not know. And that's huge for the mind, because if you're operating through the mind, which we are mostly, it's very hard to know how to do it without the mind.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like it takes a lot of bravery and courage.
It is a kind of courage. It's actually, I mean, it's a paradox, because it's actually very simple. It's our natural state. I like the term awakeness. The discovery of awakeness. It's not even awakening, because awakening again has this mental idea that something happens. Yeah, but actually it's not a happening. It's almost a non-happening. It's when everything that's false sort of gets lifted or dissolved, and nothing happens to change anything. But what appears to happen is that which we already are, which is awakeness itself, is revealed, because there's nothing in the way to prevent the seeing of that, the knowing of that, the being of that, the living of that, the truth of that. And so I love this word awakeness. It sort of strips all the mysticism and historical and traditional stuff out of it. And awakeness is natural. It's what we are. So on the one hand, yes, it's very simple, it's very natural, and it's effortless. On the other hand, it appears to the ego self, or the sense of self, which operates most of the time, that it's really difficult.
Right, because it means that you have to give up the sense of self that you constructed, or society has constructed for you, and
Yeah.
and how you fit in and everything. And so when I speak with other spiritual teachers, the common theme seems to be that they had this experience similar to yours, where there was a dying, and into the unknown, into the abyss.
Yeah.
I think several of them actually describe the same words. So there is a commonality there. And so how does it feel when you're in that, now that you're in this awakened state? Do you still feel like this little self, which is like your former self, who wants the security and all these little these things, that then there's like this big self who like knows better?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, because what I found is that there's a process of maturation that happens over time. There's the revelation of awakeness, which can happen very quickly. I mean, for me, it was in sort of I don't know how long it took, but it was like a moment. And then that revelation starts to live itself out through the everyday experience, and that takes time, and that's a kind of maturation. I like to say it's like a flower when it comes, a little bud comes out of the tree. It's like the moment of the revelation of awakeness, and then over time that little bud opens its petals, and that's the maturation process. And we can't force that, and we can't make it happen. It just happens when we're true to that revelation that's happened in the awakening moment. And I've forgotten your question, which was how is it now? Is there still a self?
Is there still a little self?
Oh, okay. Well, yes, the self dies into the unknown, and this theme of death is like you say, a common thread, because it is a death. It's a kind of psychological death. But the self does re-emerge in that, because we still have a form, a physical form, and we're still operating in the 3D reality, the three-dimensional reality. Now, the point is that when we re-experience the self operating through what appears as the three-dimensional world, is there a re-identification with that? In other words, do we derive our identity from that? Because inevitably, the mind will continue its momentum, and there is the possibility to re-identify with that. It's like the ocean, or the water that makes up the ocean, realizes that it is water and not a wave and not even the ocean. It's water. That's the moment of awakeness. And then it starts to realize that it's as vast as the ocean. It's just everything. Yeah. And that's uncontainable and unfathomable and untamable. You can't contain it or change it or control it. And then it realizes that there are waves appearing in this ocean. So that's like the self, or the movement of the mind, reappearing as the movement of life happens. At that point, it's possible for re-identification with the waves. And then what happens is that what we have the experience of experiencing an awakened state and then losing it, or thinking that we've lost it.
So are you saying we have a choice? So once you're in that awakened state, you have a choice whether you choose to identify or re-identify with the small self?
Yeah, I think it appears that we have a choice. Yeah, because we can recognize that there is a pull to re-identify, and we can choose to recognize that revelation. Whether that choice is really a choice, or whether that happens for some people because that's what's happening, and then for others it doesn't, I don't really know. I know for me that that process happens over a period of a number of years, where initially there was still a little moving in and out. There were certain times or situations where that re-identification with the wave would come more strongly, because there was still some contraction from my history that would play itself out. And then I would rediscover the vastness of being, not through any meditation technique, but just because that's what was here in this awareness. And then gradually, this moving in and out of it has become less and less. And so there is now a constant backdrop of awakeness. Even when there are lots of waves happening, the re-identification with the wave doesn't have the same stickiness. And I think that why it happens more for some people and not for others, this re-identification, I think, and I don't really know, but I think that it has to do with the amount of stickiness is the way I call it. You know, if there's stuff that we haven't really looked at or we're still frightened to look at, we haven't processed it or gone into it or inquired into it, that stickiness can pull us back. And some people don't have as much sticky stuff and some people do. And for myself, I had done so much inner work previously. I had done so much emotional release work, so much trauma work, so much looking at my story and unraveling it, and also physical body work, that none of it was very sticky anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
So I think that that was a support for not re-identifying with the waves.
Hmm. Yeah, it seems like I'm discovering that too on a personal level, that it's really good to do that inner work and to clear any of the trauma, because um, those impressions do make a big difference in your life and whatever you're trying to pursue. I'm an artist, I'm a dancer, and as I go forward in my career, I'm realizing, oh, I'm coming up across these obstacles, and things, and but the obstacles are the ones that I put in the way, my mind and my background. So, like anything, I'm learning, and it's interesting talking to you that even with this quest for truth, it's the same thing, that you have to be willing, for lack of a better term, face your demons,
It's like
and
facing
yeah,
everything and avoiding nothing.
yeah, yeah, and that takes a lot of courage and bravery. It's not for
Yeah.
the faint of heart. I think people have this idea that they don't go on the spiritual path or whatever they're wanting to aspire to be. Whatever is great. I think the greater the calling, the more work you have to do.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Well,
learning.
the sincere pull to truth is a serious journey. It's a deep journey, and it really is like a flame that starts to burn inside. And we can be frightened of that flame, and but also enticed by that flame. And at some point, you have to give everything to that. And giving everything to that without knowing what that means. Yeah, because the fear comes when we think, oh, well, I've got to give everything to that. That means I need to give up my career, I need to give my house, and I've got to give up my husband, and I've got to give up my children.
Hmm.
These are all ideas. We don't know what giving everything to it is, what it really means. But being willing to do that, it pulls us into it. And the, 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 the possibility for real freedom that is worth so much more than any idea of a life of security or peace is just so much more. It's just everything is given to us in that, and nothing can really replace that. And at some point in a human's journey, in a human being's journey, that pull to that fire will come anyway, whether it's now or later.
So do you think that pull to the fire can relate in other ways? Like your path seems to be being a spiritual teacher. And so can it be being an artist or being a great mother, or whatever?
Absolutely. There's no shape or form. Every flower is unique. Yeah. Your flower is totally you. My flower is totally me. Every flower that is the expression of awakeness is absolutely unique. It has its own shape and form and its own fragrance. Well, the fragrance is the same because awakeness is awakeness in you, in me, or in anyone else. But the shape and form through which that fragrance is released is absolutely unique. And not everyone has to be a spiritual teacher. I get asked that question quite a lot. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, why do all awakened people become spiritual teachers? And that's not true, because the ones that don't become spiritual teachers you just don't see or hear about. They're much more invisible, but of course, whatever way it expresses itself, even if it's doesn't appear to be very grandiose, it's quite ordinary. In fact, it is all ordinary. Is absolutely perfect. Everything has its right place. Every part of life is absolutely perfect as it is, and the I don't know why it becomes it reveals itself in different forms through different people. But for me, I've always been a kind of teacher. In my academic days, I the side job to that was teaching my academic work. Um, when I went on a deep exploratory path after a number of years of self-exploration, I eventually, it took a long time, but I eventually developed a method of transformation using movement and breath work that was a teaching. So I would hold small groups, in fact, sometimes large groups, and we'd explore that with people and release their emotional trauma through various methods. So for me, it's always come in that way. Therefore, it's not a surprise that it is the way it is now.
Right. Yeah,
For
that's kind of
somebody else,
like,
it'll be totally different.
yeah, kind of like, what is that? It's a branch of psychology. What they use dance, to kind of
Say
help
that
people.
again, Reggie.
There is a branch of psychology where they use dance, to kind of help people move through their
Sure.
traumas, and even
Yeah.
theater, or even art. And there's dance therapy, and there's
Yeah.
art therapy and all of that.
Sure.
So
So
you're
you can bring awakeness to that. You can be awake within that. There are many therapists now who are speaking and being with clients, in one-to-one sessions, from the perspective of awakeness, because they are awake, and they don't have to be spiritual teachers in that way, but they bring that into it, and that is happening more and more and more. To bring a non-dual perspective or a non-dual awareness to the therapeutic process is wonderful, because then you have the form and the expression through the form and through the story of one's life, as well as the much bigger perspective and the resting in that which is really true. And it's far more powerful and effective. So it can come in many, many different ways.
So do you think there's dharma? Do you think that what you're doing now is dharma, and should people how to pursue their dharma?
Dharma, did you say?
Yes, dharma.
Right.
Yes.
As in service. Yeah. For a long time, after the experience that we talked about just now, falling into the unknown and the death of self, I actually didn't know. I didn't know what my life was about. I didn't know what I should be doing. I didn't know that I was going to be um, teaching this or sharing this, if you like. I mean, it's not teaching anything, but it's sharing it. I just didn't know. I didn't sort of go, oh, right, okay, I've awakened. I'm now going to be a spiritual teacher. I had no idea. In fact, quite the opposite. If there was any sort of idea of that, either in myself or through others, that might say, oh gosh, you should be doing this, I would turn away from it, because I didn't know if it was true. It was like an idea that I should be doing that. And I couldn't go back into any ideas, any imaginations, any concepts of what I should or shouldn't be doing. So I stayed in a place of not knowing for a number of years again. It wasn't anywhere near as chaotic or dramatic as the previous time where I was sort of penniless and homeless. But it was a time of just not knowing what my place in the world was in that way, even though I was very comfortable in the not knowing. And it just took time for it to be really embodied. And that really only happened a couple of years ago, really properly, if I can say properly, but really fully, where I started to speak in small groups and a few people came, and what was being spoken, I didn't know what was going to be said, and it was just very authentic and very true, and it arose out of silence. And there were little gatherings in my local town, and I didn't know what they really meant or what they were, but various people would come. Um, Initially, they were Course in Miracles students, because there's a vibrant Course in Miracles community here where I live, and they were looking for something new and fresh, and somehow they found out about me, and they came, and it sort of resonated, because there's definitely a resonance with it, and it grew from there. And as it grew, it just became what it is now, more and more. But that's not because I planned it or had an idea of, like a business plan or a career plan about it. There was no concept of that. It just happened. And I found that what was moving me in my life, what appears as a self, what appears as the shape and form of my life, was actually coming from a very different place. It was happening through me, as me, rather than me trying to make it happen or having an idea of how it's going to happen and all this sort of stuff. So in that sense, I would describe that as grace. There's a very both strong and delicate sense of grace in my life now, that doesn't go away, even though there are still, inevitably, as the way life is, challenges and situations that happen. Like my mother died last year, and that was a huge change and very unexpected, and yet there was still grace throughout that whole experience. So my whole idea I had when I was much younger and in the initial stages of my search, that life is this place, this enlightened life or awakened life is a place where nothing bad happens. That's really, that whole idea is dead. It's died.
So how do you deal with the challenges now and the stresses of life?
It's like, sometimes the sea is really stormy, and sometimes the sea is really gentle, and none of it matters. When it's stormy, I experience the storm. It's not like I don't have feelings. I have feelings. I might feel irritated, or I might feel angry, or I might feel, I don't know, sad, or everything is felt in real exquisite sensitivity. In fact, the feeling is more exquisite than it's ever been, both the heights and the depths and the breadths. But I am not that. I am not the waves, and that knowingness is here. It's always here. So it might appear to the outside world that I don't know, oh, she's still feeling this and that and the other. But actually, the inner experience is very different. And those feelings actually don't last long. It's like they're felt, and as soon as they're felt, they're gone. And that's the difference. And I think before, and I think for the majority of people, if they haven't um, opened or discovered awakeness, is that those feelings they become contractions, they become sticky, mental and emotional energies that just don't keep being purified. And now what's happening, everything is like purified as it's being experienced. It doesn't stick to anything. It's like being transparent. So everything is felt, everything is experienced, but this that appears as a form and a self and a personality, which still plays itself out, um, is permeable, is transparent, and that's where the freedom is.
So I was reading on your website that you're married. You're a
I
musician,
am,
an
yes,
artist, a musician. Yay!
yes.
So what is that like? Being a relationship in this awakened state.
Oh, great question. Kavi, my beloved, came into my life shortly after. my experience of the discovery of awakeness. And in that sense, the meeting was very different to any other relationship that I've had. And in fact, in the discovery of awakeness, I had stopped wanting, looking, or needing for a relationship. And up until then, in my life, relationship had been a very primary focal point, because there was this whole idea that it would give me the love that would make me feel loved. Therefore, I would be lovable in the eyes of God, essentially, and worthy. And that whole story completely evaporated or died into the awakeness itself. And after that, there was no need for relationship, no looking for relationship, because I am this. So this doesn't, there's no duality in this. So it doesn't need anything outside of itself. And that was very wonderful and very freeing. And then when Cabby appeared in my life, and that took some time, it was like, oh, okay, relationship, what does that mean? And then there was this very quick knowing that this was another level of surrender, a surrender into the world, a surrender into form again, a form appearing as relationship. But it was very different, because we were both very consciously dedicated to truth in slightly different ways. Cabby's was less of a traditional inquiry, but he was also very much about truth in his own way. And we, if you like, dedicated our relationship not to each other. It wasn't about what we could get from each other, or what we, or that kind of thing. It was really about dedicating it to truth. And we didn't really know what that meant, but that seemed appropriate and right. And ever since then, our relationship has been, in some ways, very, very ordinary. And in other ways, completely extraordinary. I can say, from my point of view, it is the most free and joyful and delightful relationship I've ever had. There's no sense of being trapped. There's no sense of being diminished or elevated. There's no, which I used to feel before in my relationships, there's no, that there's a sense that he is me and I am him, and why would I ever want to blame or hurt or hold back or any of this? Is totally open, it's totally honest, it's totally authentic. And of course, little things come up, sometimes a little bit of conflict, but it's met immediately. There's none of the stuffing down that normally happens in relationship, where we don't speak the truth or explore the truth, and I'm talking about personal truth here, not absolute truth, but although it leads there, but the personal truth of what I feel, or there's no blame game, there's no, and there's no trying to control each other, or any of that stuff that happens. Everything is inquired into, explored, played with. It's just delightful. It's like a bubbling spring.
So do you feel like he's like the one, or your soulmate? Do you even believe in that?
Oh, we used to get a lot of people saying to us, oh, you guys are twin souls, you guys are soulmates. And we kind of explored that for a bit, and it didn't feel true. It's another one of those things that's like enlightenment. There are a lot of ideas about that. How do I know they're true? It's something that I've read, or it's something that I've been told by some psychic, or it's something that somebody else has experienced. I don't know. How do I know? In present moment awareness, the whole idea of twin soul is meaningless. It evaporates. Or soulmate. I don't know. All I know is that here's this other form that's appearing in my life that's absolutely delightful. And, there is a relating to that. And that relating happens in truth on all levels, personal truth, deeper truth, absolute truth. Everything's appearing as this play of forms. That's all I know. I don't know anything else.
Well, how do you feel about love? And what is love like to you?
Love's like the word truth. There's personal love and there's the truth of love. Yeah. Personal love is, or human love is mostly what we think of or what we know as something that we get from something outside of ourselves, usually another person, that makes us feel lovable, that makes us feel warm, that makes us feel complete, that makes us feel whole. I'm not interested in that because it's not true. There is nothing outside of me, not even my beloved, that can give me that which I already am. That's why this relationship is so different. There is nothing that Kavi can give me that makes me feel better. Well, I mean, yeah, in the normal human interaction, there are certain little things that feel nice, you know, his attention or I don't know, something. But I'm talking about there is nothing that can complete me. There is nothing that can make me more whole than that which I already am, in which case there's no need. So there's that love, which isn't the whole picture of love, it's just a story of love, a human story of love. And there's love, which essentially is unknowable and again, like enlightenment, has a picture attached to it. But when we inquire into what love is, it's unspeakable. It can't be captured in words. Even even unconditional love has an idea attached to it. Even that has a containment or a boundary around it. So we can throw that little phrase out as well. It's unconditioned. It's unconditionable. It's uncontainable. It's unbounded. It can't be known with any mental perception. It's not even a lovely feeling in the heart. It's something much more mysterious than that. And if I'm going to put words to it, I can only say that love, in its truest essence or meaning, is the same as emptiness. Emptiness is also full, and that fullness, we could say, is experienced as love. Fire, the fire of truth is love, because we think it's something that comes and destroys everything and strips everything away. What is that if not love? Life is love. There isn't anything that isn't love. Even the horrors are love. Even the darkness is love. There is only love expressing itself as every manifestation and every permutation and every phenomenon. But to really know that is a profound inquiry into what's here, what reality is. And so it's not something that we can contain in words.
So you think the quest for truth and the quest for love are ultimately the same thing?
They're ultimately the same thing. But when we quest for love, it's not the same thing. Because inevitably we're looking for something to make us feel more whole, to make us feel more fulfilled, to make us feel complete. And the paradox is that the discovery of what is true is the discovery that we are whole and complete as we are. So in that sense, it is the same as love. But when we go out looking for love, that's a kind of preventative to the deeper inquiry.
Mm-hmm. Now you said something about Dharma being service. And that's interesting. Because I don't always think of it that way. So I'd like a little more um, insight into that. Because I think that's a
Um,
beautiful way of describing Dharma.
how do you see Dharma?
Well, if I think about it, it makes sense. You know, when I think of Dharma, I think of as a calling. Like it was, like you said, it wasn't like a mental construct. Like I'm going to go out and do this particular thing. It's kind of like you were chosen to do it, you know, or you fell into it, or it was opened up to you. So it's kind of a surrender.
Hmm. Eh, even the word service can be misconstrued by the mind, because
Mm-hmm.
service tends to have this idea that we're doing something good in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that taps into an identity of being pious or all this stuff, and that's not it either. True service is when life is living itself out through you as you, and there is almost no sense of self invested in it. In fact, there isn't a sense of self invested in it. Yeah, you're not doing it with a sense of agenda. If there's an agenda, and those agendas can be really subtle, the agenda is that, oh, people will see me as being really good or doing good things, or the agenda is that, oh, it'll bring more love into my life, or the agenda is it means I'm a spiritual person and that makes me feel good, or the agenda is it'll give me the life that I really want, or it'll give me freedom, even, the freedom of spiritual freedom. Any agenda is a sort of tendril of re-identification through that which you're doing in the world. Yeah, and real service doesn't have a sense of agenda in it. Real service is the flow of grace that happens, and if there is any involvement in that, that involvement obviously has to engage the linear mind. Like, we had to arrange to call each other today and have a Skype call, and we had to arrange the date and this kind of thing. So of course that engages the linear mind that plans things, so it doesn't throw all that away, but that's in service. Mm? Without the agenda. I'm using this as a really simplistic example. So, but the motivation, if you like, the movement of what happens, as things appear in one's life, they don't have agenda at the root of them. It's simply happening. And again, that's not necessarily something that can be seen from the outside. It's an inner experience that gives life a very different quality to the kind of conventional or normal reality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So does it
It,
start with following your heart then? In the beginning, you said always follow your heart. So that will that lead you to your path or your dharma?
Following your heart can mean, again, like a lot of different things, can't it? What does it mean? Does it mean it makes you feel good? It makes you feel loved. It makes you feel, I don't know. Sometimes, if we have an agenda that it will lead you to something, that's still an agenda. Yeah, we follow an inner impulse. I don't know whether that's your heart or your gut or
Mm-hmm.
your being, but follow an inner impulse. There's an inner impulse that'll move you in different directions. And sometimes that might appear to take you on course, and sometimes it appears to take you off course. Like for me in my academic days, it appeared to take me very off course,
Mm-hmm.
but it was an inner impulse. I had to follow it. I don't know. Did that lead me somewhere? I don't know. I stopped knowing or caring where it will lead me.
Mm-hmm. Following the inner impulse. Yeah, it's interesting. It's sometimes it's hard to do, in the world to do that because there's so many distractions. So how do you know to even trust that impulse?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, one of the ways we can navigate that, if that's what are wanting to do and looking for, is what you just said, distractions. Noticing, this is where we do have a conscious choice, noticing where there is a distraction. And that distraction always has to do with safety and security. Mm. The ego mind, the mind that is totally invested in survival of separate self, will always have as its primary motivation security and safety. And so it will follow any what appears like a distraction, which it won't necessarily appear as a distraction to the ego self. It'll appear as what really needs to happen. Like, I really need to, I don't know. For me, it used to be reading books. I mean, something as silly as that. I used to read a lot of spiritual and inspirational books because I thought that was going to help me grow. And it did on one hand, but eventually it became what we could call a distraction because it gave me a sense of safety, that life was really safe and okay, and I was a good person, and I was growing, and I was going to get somewhere in my life, at least on a spiritual level, if I read enough inspiring books. And at some point, I realized they were a distraction. The moment that I went to pick up a book was a distraction. And this constant noticing of the different things that pulled me allowed me to simply be with what is. And I think that's what allowed a falling into the unknown. And that's a very small example that was huge in my life. Now I can read books whenever I want, but it's not coming from that place. And then, of course, we have the bigger situations in one's life, like the distractions of security that come with certain jobs or career choices or relationship choices or family choices. And, of course, there's a bigger investment in that. But we can start to notice and be true to ourselves or be true with ourselves as to what our motivation is. What's motivating us to make that decision? What's motivating us to follow that course of action? If we're really true with ourselves, then that's the beginning of truth. Yeah? It's not even spiritual, is it? It's just ordinary. It's truth. Why have I chosen this? Why am I choosing this? The same way that when I chose my academic path, at some point it became uh, the primary motivation became so that I could be somebody in the world and actually feel good about myself and prove myself to the world so that daddy would love me or God would love me. So when I was true with myself about that, it just went, it had no meaning. It was like the rug was pulled out of my feet. So I think we can do that. Yeah. And sometimes we don't want to do that. But if you do,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, in terms of security and safety, I think with women, especially at least for most women, I know I do, have this urge, to want to have children and to feel safe and to be taken care of. So did you experience any of that as well? Or was it, because I've met women who don't have that desire to have children. And
Mm,
sometimes they seem a lot freer.
I certainly had the desire for relationship as security. That was one of my primary motivators after my academic journey. But my primary motivator became having a relationship in my life because that would make me complete, it would make me fulfilled, it would mean that I was loved, it would mean I was lovable, it gave meaning to my life and all of that. So definitely that was a primary motivation. Um, the natural female impulse to have children did rise, but it rose and fell. It wasn't terribly strong in me because even though I wanted a relationship, um, I I was very much still not very conformist in terms of social and cultural rules. So I kind of quickly understood or got it that having children was such a inherited thing that women should have children that I really questioned it. And so, yeah, the biological maternal instinct would rise and fall, but partly because I wasn't in a position in my life to actually really bring up a child in a way that I would have felt I would want to, because my life was very chaotic and unstable. And partly because I really felt the pressure of historical female conditioning, both through my family lineage and beyond that, that I sort of, I don't know if I rebelled against it, but I just didn't buy into it. I just didn't buy into it. And at some point, I looked at it very carefully and, well, not carefully, I looked at it very closely and realized that's really all it was, a kind of biological conditioning or biological and cultural conditioning. And when I saw that, it was like the bubble burst. And I realized that actually I didn't want to have children because having children was the same thing for me. I mean, it's completely different for each person, but for me, it was not true. It would, it was some idea that that's what you're supposed to do, or that it would give me something that I'm not already. And so I quickly got through my inner insight that the whole world, if you like, was my child. Or I was the child of the whole world. There was no, again, there was no separation. It was a bit like relationship. It sort of happened around the same time. The need for relationship and the need for having children just went at the same time, because I am this that is always here, and this that is always here doesn't need anything. And that doesn't mean that we don't have children, because then even awakeness can relate with that aspect of the human experience, and that's very beautiful as well. But that's not the way it happened for me, because it just didn't. The impulse wasn't there anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like what you said about, yeah, like what is true for you, because for some women, having children is true. And I meet a lot of women now, especially the younger generation, who feel like they want to have children, but they think they shouldn't. So, um, yeah, so coming back to what is true for you.
It's really good to examine it, and it's certainly one of those areas of life that isn't examined. I mean, most uh, child, the bringing of children into the world is mostly unconscious. It's mostly unconscious. It's a biological drive, and the invitation is to look at it, yeah, as to what is the motivating force, and to be true to that. It's not wrong one way or the other, but mostly women are taken over by their hormones and their maternal instincts, and it's an unconscious choice.
Right. Unless we can do it consciously, as you said. Really look at
Yeah.
it and do it in a way
Yeah.
that's really conscious and supportive.
Yeah. I don't know if it can ever become fully conscious. I just don't know. I mean, maybe the biological drive is far too strong. I just don't know. But it's at least good, to look at, inquire into, like, is having a child like going to give me meaning and purpose to my life or completion to my life? Because really, that's not enough. I mean, it might be enough, but I'm quite radical in that way, and maybe that's just part of the human experience. Maybe you know, it's just messy.
Yeah, maybe.
All relationship is messy, whether that's the relationship with our children or relationship with a partner. It's a relationship with the world. It's a messy experience, but it can also be conscious.
Yeah, it's great to realize that it's messy, but you can still live in it and be awakened, right? Like you're not avoiding the mess.
Yeah, sure.
Do you believe in karma and reincarnation?
I don't know. I really don't know. I really don't know until I have a direct experience of it. I have done, very, very much so, in my initial opening to the journey of self-exploration, the experiences of what appeared to be past life memories and all of this were very strong in me in the early years. But as time's gone on and as awakeness has revealed itself, I cannot categorically say that that is reality. I don't know. Because any idea on my part of it being true as a fact is another idea. And I just don't know. What I do know, if it's a knowing, is that I'm willing to be open to what appears as an ongoing unfoldment of present moment awareness in life and in what appears to be death. And then I'll tell you what my experience is. I just don't know beyond that.
Okay. So what is your truth? What is truth for you right now? We're nearing the end of our interview. It's wonderful talking to you. Very, very, very nice. Very sweet, but full of passion as well. So, yeah, what is truth for you right now?
This. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. So you're the author of, I see a couple of books on your website.
Sure.
Change Your Life, Change Your World, and let's see, this is another one. How to Find God Everything.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Those books were written in the early days of like almost straight after the revelation of awakeness. So I hadn't really. Um, all I can say is that the way that it is expressed now has been greatly refined in some ways, just simply through the living experience of it and certain ways of expression, and also where my attention is turned to. The kind of conversations that are being had are actually quite radically different. And I'm working on a third book now. That's not to demean in any way what was being expressed through those books, and it's still highly relevant. But I'm working on a third book now, which really explores much more some of the conversations that we're having here in this interview, and much more questions that are really a lot of people are asking in the inquiry, in the field of inquiry and non-duality, which is usually about the relationship between the absolute and the relative, personal truth and absolute truth. What's the meaning of enlightenment? How do we embody that? Can it be embodied? Is there a self? The relationship between the body and awakeness, the relationship between emotions and awakeness, and these kind of things, kind of questions that are very much the modern cutting edge of non-dual conversations. And these are areas that I hadn't addressed so much in my early books. So I'm really excited to get that written and released.
Will it be through Amazon? We can find your book through Amazon, right?
The two that are already published, yes, you can find those on Amazon for sure.
Okay.
Oh, actually, I think how to find God in everything is I don't know if that's available. There used to be an American edition of that, and I don't know if that's available anymore, which is a shame. It's available on Amazon.co.uk and most other countries, but that's something I need to look into and find out that there's still an American edition of it.
Okay. Okay, right on. Okay. Well, yeah, it was a real pleasure sharing with you and connecting with you. I'm glad that we followed through and made it happen. I'm glad that we followed through and made it happen.
Yeah. Sure. It's a real pleasure. Right? It's a nice conversation.
Thank you. So, Amoda Jeevan. So, what is your website and how can people contact you for more information?
Yeah, it's www.amodamarjivan.com. So AMODAMAJEEVAN.com. I know it's a mouthful. Everything's on there, newsletter. There's also a Facebook page. If you type in Amoda Marjivan, or on the website, there's a Facebook icon button. My website's currently going through major transformation. There'll be a lot more articles and videos and things like that, but that'll take a little bit of time.
Yeah, it's okay, I understand. Okay, well, thank you so much. I look forward to connecting with you, possibly again sometime. And namaste.
Okay, namaste.